Welcome to the NZ Travel Show, an interactive show where you can ask your NZ travel questions to the experts behind nzpocketguide.com, New Zealand's largest travel guide. The NZ Travel Show will start in exactly 2 minutes. Just the time for you to hit the like button, ring the notification bell, and subscribe if you have not done so yet. nzpocketguide.com has over 3,000 articles covering all aspects of travelling in New Zealand, from a working holiday gap year to tips for a perfect family holiday. The site also features dozens of pre-made itineraries that you can use to plan your ideal trip in New Zealand. It's all available for free at nzpocketguide.com, so check it out. The NZ Travel Show is hosted by Robin, the Operations Manager of South Pacific Pocket Guide, the company behind nzpocketguide.com. The New Zealand Travel Show is also hosted by Laura, a journalist and editor-in-chief of South Pacific Pocket Guide and all its publications, including nzpocketguide.com. We're exactly 1 minute away from the NZ Travel Show. Get yourself comfortable and start asking your NZ travel questions in the chat. Robin and Laura will go over them when the show starts. In 30 seconds, our experts will be live from New Zealand to give you all the practical New Zealand travel tips you need, from the best transport options to the best accommodations to choose for the perfect New Zealand holiday. Live from New Zealand, this is the NZ Travel Show with your travel experts, Robin and Laura.
And we're live!
Good morning!
Alright, so it is Sunday, the 15th of September 2024, and this is the NZ Travel Show. But today it's a little bit different. We are not going to have a theme this week, we're just going to answer all your questions, and even better, I scoured through all the emails we often receive from all of our travel guides, and I have the most asked questions right here. And we'll go over the questions that you guys really often ask. But if you have some questions of your own, there is a live chat right here. You can put all your questions right now live. We can chit chat all together. But first question that I always get is, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Well, every email always start like, hey, how are you? You know, so technically it's the most asked questions I ever receive is, how are you?
But do people usually mean it when they ask you
I
that,
think it's
Robin?
more of a greeting nowadays. Nobody
Yeah.
cares. Nobody's really like, so Robin, pour your heart out. What's going on with you?
How are you?
How are you feeling? Okay, so we have Anthony Comstock saying Morena from Vallejo, California.
Oh,
That's
Vallejo.
awesome.
Sounds exotic.
Laura, what does Morena mean?
It means good morning in the Maori language of New Zealand, which is Te Reo Maori.
Nice. And we also have Adil that says Kia ora, Robin, Laura, and all the viewers. Kia ora, Adil. And Kia ora means kind of good morning, welcome in Maori
just
as
like
well.
a kind of greeting of
It's a general
hello.
greeting.
Yes.
How you doing?
How you doing?
Which is also not a question, crazily. All right, so if you have any questions, if you're currently planning a trip to New Zealand or the South Pacific, so we are the two talking heads behind New Zealand and some of the South Pacific largest travel guides. We run NZ Pocket Guide, we run Cook Islands Pocket Guide, we run Samoa Pocket Guide, we run Tonga Pocket Guide, we run Fiji Pocket Guide, of course, and we run Niue Pocket Guide as well.
All of them.
All of that are a website for the South Pacific, and they are up-to-date travel guides for those destinations. We travel there very regularly. We make sure that all the information we have is up-to-date and accurate, and we also help a lot of people plan their trip, which is a lot of fun. So if you are in one of those categories, feel free to use the live chat and ask your questions. If you're watching a replay of this, put your questions in the comments of YouTube. because, well, I can get to them a little bit later and answer to you in writing. It's always fun. And I'm planning on doing one of those videos where we go through like the most common YouTube comments we get as well, which is going to be fun. All right, should we begin with questions that we often get?
Yeah, let's begin.
Okay, so all right, this is pretty obvious, right? But like local recommendations, right? So what's the best time to visit? Insert here destination name, right? It doesn't matter which destination we're covering and where you're contacting us from. You're always asking us what is the best week, a month, or time
Right down
to
to the day. What is the best day to visit?
What's the single best day? So
Yeah.
obviously there is no single best day or anything, but there are seasonal difference between the month.
Yeah, I think my overall advice, I'll go through specifics in a second, but my overall advice to most people is usually to travel when you can. It's usually
That's a good time to travel. Yeah.
Exactly. It kind of sounds silly, but I feel like just getting the good amount of time, like that will give you a decent trip, and not trying to squeeze in a trip when you don't really have the time. You end up being rushed.
I'm just going to piggyback on that. I think the best time to travel is when you can afford to take one extra week.
Yes.
Because
that's a good one.
people always end up thinking they just didn't have long enough in any of the destinations they go to. And, like going there for a longer period of time is always better. So the best time, that would be mine. But what's about you?
That's the sort of, I guess, out of the box. Outside the box sort of answer.
Okay, let's talk numbers and seasons
But let's go, if, people are talking about what's they're looking for a specific weather or time when the tourists are there or not there. So in the South Pacific, in places like Tonga, Fiji, Niue, Cook Islands, etc., there is two distinct seasons. There's a wet season and a dry season.
Hey, Gmail.
Hey Gmail. So because there's two distinct seasons. So the wet season is usually, as the name suggests, a more hot and humid time of the year. And although it can rain at any time of the year in the South Pacific,
although it will rain at any time of the year in the South Pacific.
It will rain in the dry season as well. It just means that there's an increased chance of more sort of heavier showers and that sort of thing in the wet season. So the dry season is usually the time that is most appealing for people to travel to the South Pacific. And the dry season tends to run between, it starts drying up around May, and then it gets drier. Like the driest time would usually be June, July, August, September, and then you're sort of transitioning back into the wet season as you get through to November. So that tends to be the dry season in the South Pacific.
And that's what most people prefer because, well, there's a little bit less rain. Also, it feels a little less stuffy, right? But we do like the wet season better because usually the wildlife is actually more, active and live. And it's even hotter, so we do like, especially Laura, she does like to be very, very hot.
Yeah, that's also the...
And the rain is definitely not too big of a hindrance in the South Pacific because, as we said, it's so hot, it's actually very much welcomed. We've gone through crazy amount of rains at times, and it usually is absolutely fine.
Yeah, I still absolutely love traveling during the wet season. Moving on to the sort of tourist seasons, of course, the dry season is the most popular time to go to South Pacific destinations. Therefore, that is the peak season. Things might be a little more expensive, especially when it comes to airfares. Some destinations have higher prices in accommodations. I definitely see that in the Cook Islands, in Fiji. Some of the hotels will put their prices up a bit during the dry season. There's that sort of downside to the dry season.
All right, so we're going to quickly say hi to Denis and Geraldine, saying Kiara, Robin and Laura, and to Sarah Davidson that says 47 days until she lands in Christchurch.
Ooh.
I'm so excited to finally get here. Happy to finally catch her live. Yeah,
Awesome.
that's awesome. So let's talk about New Zealand. So when is the best time to visit New Zealand? So because basically the travel guides that we run, right? We have travel guides for the Pacific, which have some sort of common thread when it comes down to like best time to visit,
Yes.
etc. But then we do New Zealand, and that's very different, right? So what's the best time to travel in New Zealand?
Yeah, because although New Zealand is in the South Pacific, it is much further down south.
It's subantarctic.
It's much further down south compared to the South Pacific Islands, as the other destinations are more commonly known. So yeah, New Zealand has very different seasons
Yep.
and a best time to come. New Zealand experiences 4 seasons, sometimes in a day, but 4 seasons. So it has its, the usual sort of, winter, spring, autumn, and summer. And
The weather in New Zealand is mostly comparable to things like Canada,
Europe,
Netherlands,
UK.
those kind of
Yeah.
weather, UK, those kind of weather. That's why you will kind of like the pattern will be like that, except that the months are flipped on their heads.
Yes, because New Zealand is in the southern hemisphere, you will experience the summer in New Zealand in the months of December, January, and February. That's usually the warmest months. And then winter, on the other hand, is between. Let me get my head round to it.
June, July,
July, and August. So so that's like sort of if you're used to sort of the northern hemisphere winter, summer, etc., then that's opposite in New Zealand. So yeah, of course. The peak season in New Zealand is therefore in summer in the months of December, January, and February, but that sort of tourist season's extended a little bit, going from usually starting around the end of November, going through until March is usually where you'll find New Zealand gets to its busiest in terms of tourist numbers. But the good thing about New Zealand is that it's quite an isolated country, so if you're comparing the tourist season in New Zealand to, say, really popular places that are close to high populations, say in Europe or the US, the tourist numbers or that feeling of being crowded is very much different in New Zealand. You will very rarely feel like it's too crowded compared to those other destinations.
So what would you say are like the two best months to travel in New Zealand?
Okay, so for me, I usually like to head for some shoulder seasons. So that gets like the best of having good weather.
So what are those months?
So those months are usually, I would say, around November, October, November.
Okay, so that'll be your favorite time. So
Yeah.
I'm actually on the other side of summer. I like March and April. Because usually you still have like all the staff are like well trained around the tourism industry. Everybody that done their season are kind of finishing the season, so you get great service in there.
Yeah.
So that'd be what my answer would be for New Zealand.
Nice.
All right. Hey, welcome to like everybody that just joined in the chat right now. You're more welcome to put all your questions about traveling in New Zealand and South Pacific in the chat. We're taking your question live. Otherwise, we are going through the list of the questions that we get the most by email on our travel guides. So feel free to go with your questions. Otherwise, we go with ours. We chat technically ours are yours from the email stuff. It works.
Yeah.
Okay, so another thing when it comes down to like local recommendation, everything is asking us about family-friendly activities. So is there family-friendly activities in and sending insert destination? So like Samoa, Cook Islands, Fiji, even New Zealand and everything. So the answer for New Zealand, I'm just going to do New Zealand right now, is like hell yes. There is heaps of family-friendly activities in New Zealand. Most operators will cater to kids. Do tell them that that you're going to be bringing kids. Sometimes for some adrenaline activities, age restriction will be in place. Just because we do have something called Work Safe in New Zealand, which is kind of an Adventure Smart as well. Anyway, a bunch of organizations that make sure that adrenaline adventure activities are safe. So we do have that, and there is plenty of family-friendly activities in New Zealand. And in fact, I will show you quickly how to find that out. You go right here on destinations right here, and you pick any of the destinations you want to go to. So let's say you want to go to Northland right here. And then if you scroll down right here, we have family guides right here that will help you out. So you can do that for any destinations in New Zealand. So that kind of answers...
Welcome to
Of
the
course.
ENZ Travel Show, an
I'll be
interactive
back in a
show where you
second.
can...
Here you go. Here you go. So that kind of answers the questions of... Also, I put some music in the background. Tell me if it's too loud, but here's a bit of music in the background. Cool. So yes, the answers for New Zealand. Is there family-friendly activities, or is there anything you need to know about family-friendly activities in the South Pacific?
Well, there is always some family-friendly options in any South Pacific destination, just like in New Zealand. But yeah, it maybe takes a little bit of research on what is family-friendly. Like, you know, sort of the abilities of what your kids can do. So it's always good to do a bit of research to see, okay, what does this tour entail? And just sort of basically we have those same articles that Robin was showing on NZ Pocket Guide we have for each of our South Pacific destinations. So you will find for each destination the, say, 10 best things to do in destination with kids. So yeah, we go through all those, and definitely like hits with the kids is usually more the cultural activities.
Yeah. So kids really love the weaving classes. Kids really love the animal interactions.
Yes.
You know, there's a lot of like kind of wildlife stuff to do.
Snorkeling, that sort of thing.
All those kind of things. And the staff in the South Pacific Islands tend to be excellent with kids, like
Yes.
really, really, really good with kids. And so for that reason, usually kids have an amazing time in the South Pacific. So yeah, do be aware of that. You know, when you're traveling in the South Pacific, you will be able to keep the kids entertained, so you can do something just together if you kind of wanted to.
Yeah.
All right. Gmail 11111111. That's an interesting nickname, by the way. How is it New Zealand for seeking accommodation, renting a room, flat, share in comparison to the UK? What is your best advice for solo travelers planning on staying several months? Thank you. First advice: get yourself a working holiday visa rather than a visitor visa, or rather than just coming as a holiday, just because it will make kind of all that process a little bit easier. But Laura is originally from the UK, so I think she's best to speak to this.
Yeah, so it's, I'd say, even easier than in the UK. New Zealand is less populated, therefore there's less competition when it comes to finding somewhere to rent a room or flatmates, that sort of thing. Obviously, there's different different ways of finding those. So, for instance, in New Zealand, there is a website called Trade Me, which is essentially like the eBay of New Zealand, but they also have sort of flatmate listings and that sort of thing. So just getting yourself sort of aware of the different ways to find accommodation and that sort of thing, is basically the main difference in New Zealand. And we do have articles on nzpocketguide.com which aids you with that, shows you the different ways to find flatmates. Some of them are a little bit weird, like literally there's paper bulletins in Queenstown where they list flatmates wanted and stuff like that for different areas where you're traveling to. Obviously also Facebook groups for different regions as well, where there's often accommodation advertised on there for flatmates and things. So it's just sort of knowing all those sort of resources to use for New Zealand is the main difference.
Yeah.
But in terms of finding things, it's usually a bit easier than in the UK.
Yeah. So we had a big drop of viewership right here just because there was a little bit of a bug on YouTube and the video bugged. So yeah, we'll continue with those questions. But if you pump back in, make sure to ask your questions for sure. Okay, so one of the next bunch of questions that we get quite a lot is, can you book accommodation, tours, transport for us, especially in the South Pacific, because it's hard to reach some operators or even to get a response. And so, no, we cannot. As simple as that, right? That's not our job. We're not a travel agent. We're not an operator. What we try to do is to try to send you to be able to book with those activities, to kind of give you the tip, etc. But we cannot book any of activities for you guys. There's just no easy way to say it. We sometimes thought about it and say, oh, should we expand the business and do some bookings, etc. It's just not feasible. The amount of manpower or woman power that would be needed would be absolutely insane, and we just simply can't do that. So yeah, sadly that's one of the flaw, and we kind of looking at solutions, trying to figure that out. But that's one of the flaw of our travel guide, is that we're not allowing you to book right on the go. But on the other hand, we have visited, we have checked all the places we're talking about, so we can tell you that those places exist, those places deliver good services. Because there are some places where we put warnings of like, don't go there, it's a scam or those kind of things. We actually do that for some places, and we tell you, oh, this is not really a conservation area whatsoever. They're just exploiting the animals or those kind of things. So we're pretty upfront with
If
that.
you hear of an activity and we don't mention it at all on our website, or you can't find that much information on it on our website, it's usually because we don't usually think, we might have visited it and thought that's not something we think is ethical to promote. So
we spend a lot of our lives actually going and visiting everything. So compared to a lot of other professions, such as a travel agent, which has to spend a lot of time in their offices, book travels for you guys, our job is genuinely to go over there and check that those places exist. So a travel agent wouldn't have the time to physically go themselves and check the place out and experience them out. That's our job. We go about and we will have visited all of those places. We will have been inside of those resorts, often unannounced, because we don't necessarily want them to prepare, right? So we do all those kind of things for you guys. Sadly, we just can't do the booking because we just don't have the manpower for that. And so, piggybacking on that question, another question that we get really often, and again, 11 of you guys are back, so that's good. The bug on YouTube is gone. Thank you very much for being back. Any of your questions traveling in New Zealand or in the South Pacific, put them in the comments right now. We'll get to it literally as we go. In the meantime, we're going through the most common questions and emails we usually receive from travelers. So the next question really pertains to the South Pacific much more than it pertains to New Zealand, because in New Zealand you can contact an operator very easily. But do you have any direct contact details for a specific hotel, tour company, or service providers? So one thing that you need to know about the South Pacific is that a lot of those operators are like just one person. And so the contact details is often a Facebook page, often of just said person, not even like the actual Facebook page. And the phone number is also the private number of that said person. So we can't really publish the private phone numbers of people or the private contact details on the website, right? So for that reason, we usually put the name of the business or where to find them, etc. But we don't really put the phone number of that person, because they're going to be spammed and scammed, as soon as you publish a phone number online, right? So you get harassed. So we don't want that to happen, right? So usually we give you the name of the business, and you just inquire when you arrive. So when you arrive in your resort or in your accommodation, usually that's how you book. Yeah,
there's different ways to do it. So you can, like Robin says, wait till you arrive and ask for the name at the accommodation that you're staying. Like, hey, do you know, etc. And I'd like to book with them. So that's one way of doing it, and that's usually the easiest way. But of course, a lot of people would feel like, I'd rather have some more things booked and locked in. Another way to do it is to search that name either on Google or even on Facebook, that sort of thing, and finding their Facebook page or finding some contact details via Google is another way of doing it. So just sort of searching that name in your usual sort of avenues that you would usually use to find an operator, and getting contact details that way is the way to go in the South Pacific. Even if you're like, this is not how I usually do it, there's usually a website to book things. That's just basically the way that it is done in the South Pacific, and nothing to be worried about.
Indeed. I'm sorry about the fact that YouTube is being a real pain today. I really don't know what's going on right here, but YouTube is not being nice to you all, but we'll continue answering those questions. Again, if you want to put yours in the live chat, go nuts. Otherwise, we'll fill in the air with your prepared questions. That's why we come prepared, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we come prepared. Okay, so the next kind of big batch of questions that we receive, and they're very different between New Zealand and the South Pacific, but it's all about visas. Can I go visit said place with or without a visa? And so for New Zealand, usually you can come as a tourist for 3 months is the maximum, I think, something like that.
Depends on which country you're from, but for most countries it's 3 months.
Okay. So usually for most countries, about 3 months, and you can come to visit New Zealand as a tourist. That means that you can't work for accommodations, you just can be a tourist on holiday.
Yes.
Now, what about the South Pacific? Is it easier, similar? What's the deal with that?
Yeah, it's very similar in the South Pacific. You will find that maybe that duration for a visitor visa is slightly different between countries. It ranges usually from a month long. For instance, that's the case in Tonga. You can come as a visitor for a month. Before having an option to extend your visa if you want. But in some cases, it's also up to 3 months as well, similar to New Zealand. So it really depends on the destination. And we do have all that information on our various pocket guides for the various destinations.
Yes, and if you do need to get a visa, though you have to keep in mind that in the Pacific, it is a very long, lengthy process, right?
Yes.
Even the time frame that they will give you, and we have experienced that before, where we needed a visa, and the time frame was 21 working days, and it took almost 3 months, just
Yes.
like a day shy of 3 months to get that paperwork done. So yeah, do be aware that it will not respect the timeline, especially since that's our job, right? So we actually had all the paperwork required right on the spot, right? There's nothing that was missing or anything like that. I mean, there's always interaction between you and the person that that's processing your visa, but our interactions was minimal. Was a total of 1 email basically, and that was it, right? So be aware of that. So yeah, that's something that if you do need one, for some reason we get a lot of people from the Middle East which are asking to go to the Cook Islands at the moment, so we get a lot of those emails.
Yeah.
All right. So another question pertaining to visa and immigration, Laura, and this mostly happened to be a question specific to New Zealand, but can I work in exchange for accommodation on a tourist visa?
It's a simple no.
Good day, sir. Bye.
Yeah, you do have to be on some sort of work visa, because even working for accommodation and not just money, it's still considered a way of being paid for your work. So there are, some legal issues around that. So you definitely have to be on some sort of work visa to do any sort of where you're doing a job in exchange for something. So yeah. Tourist visa, no go. You cannot do any work for accommodation on a tourist visa.
Nice. All right, Laura, I'm going to set you up on one question. I'm going to try to work on the bit rate to try to solve that that live stuff. All right, so cost and budgeting is also a really big question that we get quite often. How much does it cost to travel around and insert the destination?
Yeah, this is a tough one because we all travel so differently, and we all have sort of daily costs or things in our lives that we spend money on or we don't spend money on from person to person. So giving just a rough number, like a ballpark figure of like how much does it cost to travel for 2 weeks in, say, New Zealand or the Cook Islands, etc. And that figure is going to be different for everyone. So what we do on all of our travel guides is that we have a cost article where we have a list of all sort of various costs that you might have. We will say the cost of like various food, the cost of say different transport methods, how much does it cost to rent a car, how much is a bus fare, for example, going through all the different options because we all travel so differently. And then from there, that's the best way that you can sort of get a rough idea of what your budget should be. And then obviously always to play it safe, you add a bit more to that budget because there may be some things out of your control that you have to end up paying for. So it's always good to go with more in your budget than you intend on spending, that's for sure.
Sinema asks us a question right here. She says, "Good morning, friends. What do you want us to bring on Thursday? Something with chocolate." Here you go. That was an easy one.
Yeah, something sweet.
All right. See you then. Cool. All right. So that was the budget. Yeah. So how much does it cost to travel around? What would you say would be the cheapest out of the South Pacific destinations? Because we know New Zealand is expensive, despite the fact that some people in the UK say it's cheap. And what the hell are you talking about?
Yes.
But yeah, out of the South Pacific island that we cover, so we cover Niue, Fiji, Cook Islands, Tonga, and Samoa. What do you think would be like the most budget-friendly places to visit?
Oh, that's a tough one. actually easier to go the other way, to go from most expensive.
All right,
down
go for
to
it. So you want to
budget.
rank them? Okay, go quick. Rank them.
Okay, so most expensive, I would say, would have to be the Cook Islands,
Cook Islands most expensive. Okay, at least for more experience, of course.
Fiji.
Fiji second. Okay. It gets cheaper. It gets cheaper. What's
It's
next?
cheaper. Next, we will go for Niue.
Niue, okay, yeah, because Niue is only more like there is much less there, so
Yeah.
there's less competition, yeah.
So then after that, I would have to go for.
Whoa, the two cheapest would be Samoa and Tonga. You already got your answer, guys, but you know which
Yeah.
one would be the
I would have to say Tonga is next.
Okay, and so
Only because you're probably going to want to travel between islands, and that can be quite costly.
yeah,
And then Samoa, the cost between going island, there's only two main islands. The cost of going between them both is very cheap. $10 if you're a passenger, or more if you're in a car. But yeah, Samoa I think is like it's an easy island to get around, not much travel costs involved, and there are definitely some nice, easy, cheap ways or cheap experiences to do there as well.
indeed. Oh, I agree with that. Actually, the cheapest island, as Sinova was hinting, is the island of Catan. It only costs you about $50. You buy the game, and here you go. But that's boring. That's a boring game. All right, moving on. So that's that was like cost and budgeting and everything, right? But the next question on cost and money and everything. So, are there any budget-friendly accommodation types when it comes down to the South Pacific, or do I have to stay in a resort? Like, what's my option if
Yeah.
I want something cheap to stay?
Okay, so generally so this is actually a little bit different from destination
Alright,
to
go for
destination.
it.
So Fiji, you
Yes.
you do have backpacker resorts. You do have budget options when it comes to getting that resort experience, but you can stay in dorms, for instance. So it's similar to a hostel, like a backpacker hostel that you'd find in New Zealand, but in a resort setting.
Do you know what type of price we're talking about right here, or not on the top of your head?
So for staying on the mainland in a backpacker resort on the mainland, where you have the ability to go out for food and choose different options there, it would usually be around about between 50 and 90 Fijian dollars.
All right.
I'm sorry, I can only speak in the local currency for those. But if you're going to one of the outer islands where you have no options for food, therefore they'll give you a meal plan, so all the food will be included, then we're talking more between about 120 Fijian dollars to 200 Fijian dollars per night. So very different depending on which destination they're in Fiji. So that's Fiji. Moving on to countries like Tonga, Samoa, just thinking of other ones, that kind of Niue as well. They instead of hostels, they'll have something called guest houses, which is kind of similar to a B&B setup. You'll have your private room, but in shared facilities. You'll have a shared kitchen, lounge. That's also quite similar to New Zealand hostels as well, because they also have options to do private rooms, but in more of a shared sort of B&B guest house.
Let's say the standards are going to be a little bit lower, right? So it's cold water for the shower.
Not
usually.
always, very rarely, to be fair. Very rarely.
Okay. Well, not in our experiences, but no.
That was one time.
No, that
was
wasn't.
one time. So yeah, there is a chance of that. Like if you are
Yeah.
going very, very remote, then there may be cold water. Yes.
Which it was welcome. It was really damn hot, but
Yeah. And also in Samoa, there are these separate things called beach valets, which is basically
Yes.
like huts on the beach. You have a shared like sort of bathroom block that's gonna have cold water in it. So yeah, that's very different. But they set up these beach valets with like a mattress, mosquito nets, that sort of thing. It's an experience. So yeah, that's budget as well. And then just sort of covering all the gaps in between, you will find sort of budget hotels across all the South Pacific. So just hotels that are like 2 or 3 star, and they'll be,
basic.
pretty basic.
Nice.
So that's your budget option.
Yeah, so there are options to travel to the South Pacific relatively on a budget. Another thing to keep in mind is that there is really often sales on flights, right? Now, it's always entertaining to see people going nuts when there is a flight, which is $250. You have to remember that usually it comes with specific dates. The return flights are always vastly more expensive than the flights to get there. So when Air New Zealand is going to do a sale to have flights at $250, the return is still going to be about $400. So keep that in mind when you are deciding to, put your hopes up. But once you start kind of planning your trip on a budget, right? Once you sort out flight, once you sort out accommodation, a lot of the things to do in the islands are not necessarily pricey, right? A lot of time is going to walk about, going to the market, going to hang out with the locals, and especially going to enjoy the waters. And the waters are, go in the water and swim. So unless you have some specific activities you want to do in mind, such as like going to swim with turtles in the Cook Islands, etc., where you have to take a guide, you can do travel in the islands on the cheap. Now we come down to the other end of the scale. There are also some very premium and very, very luxury experience. And so we have the privilege to cover both on our travel guide and to experience both as well. So the question I have for you next is, if you have, let's say, an unlimited budget to travel in the South Pacific, what is worth spending the extra money on?
Okay.
Is it worth deciding to go from $1,000 night to a $5,000 night on a resort, or would you spend the money more on activities or on better transportation? Is it better to, charter a helicopter to get there so you have less kind of, bumpy roads to get to your destination? Those kind of things. So what is worth kind of spending the premium on?
Okay, so an obvious one would be if you have the option between taking, say, a ferry or taking a domestic flight to get, like a domestic scheduled flight, not necessarily a chartered flight, but a scheduled flight to get between islands. Although the scheduled flight is usually more expensive, it's usually saving you about 8 to 12 hours traveling. I'm definitely thinking about countries like Fiji and Tonga, where island groups are quite far apart, but traveling by ferry takes a long time. So yeah, definitely worth spending a bit more so that you can get to. Those outer islands are really worth, spending the extra time staying in the country to see and spending the extra time to get to. But usually the 12 hours difference can be quite a lot taken out of your holiday. So yeah.
So that's the first one you would do, transportation.
That's definitely transportation. In terms of accommodations, this is different from country to country as well. Fiji is probably an exception of when it comes to luxury accommodation compared to other destinations that we cover, such as Samoa, Tonga, Niue, and Cook Islands even. Cook Islands kind of in the middle there. In terms of luxury accommodation.
So Fiji is kind of like the primo luxury, kind of like scape.
Private island resorts, where you do actually get private island resorts in Tonga, but they'll be more like rustic and very different. And I would say that in places like Samoa and Tonga, if you want to have a bit more of a comfortable, luxurious sort of experience, then it's worth paying the extra to go more premium in those countries. But in Fiji, the standards of premium accommodations are already quite high. You maybe don't need to go spending like $10,000 per night to go stay on a private Lokala island in the outer reaches of Taveuni. There's options to go as crazy as you want in Fiji, but probably not worth it.
Yeah. And then there are some quite like really luxurious places, like 5-star luxurious places, which don't necessarily break the bank either, which is really amazing. Like I'm thinking about Nanuku Resort, for example, in the Pacific Harbor, which have absolutely like pristine top of the line standards, but they're not at the prices of the Kokomo or those kind of things. All right. Ooh, Avast is giving me a pop-up right here. Classic.
Antivirus software.
Nice. All right, and when it comes down to places like Samoa, the one thing I think is worth spending the extra money on is to actually get the right flight to get there. So one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that getting from place to places, especially in places like Samoa, right, can take time. For example, there is no flight in between both islands of Samoa, so you have to take the ferry, right? So arriving in Samoa relatively early, so you can make it onto the ferry and get to Savaii if you're staying in one of the great resorts in Savaii, then is definitely worth spending the extra money rather than having to then cut your trip in chunks and have to spend a bit of time on Upolu and then moving on to the other place. So that'd be the other.
I think transport is the main thing to allow yourself to pay a bit more for.
Because when it comes down to activities and experiences in the island, it has a plateau, right? It's kind of like at some point you've spent everything you can spend, and there is no it's not like there is a limit, but there's just nothing else to spend money on, right? You're spending money for access to this pristine place, so that's the one to keep in mind. If there was one experience I will splash on, will be to hire a private boat for the day or two and be able to go to like this exact spot where you want to go swim, or go to like the spot where there's manta rays, or to go to those places. So there's some great people that you can hire a full boat from, so like that you're not the captain, but you're chartering your own boat to whichever waters you want to go to. So that'll be the one I'll do. All right, so we covered both ends of the spectrum right here, which is really good. But yeah, more information on our travel guide, of course, which is available online and for free, so you don't break the bank. Look at that. Crazy.
And it's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, next questions that we are often getting. Again, if you're just joining in right now, we are answering all your questions live about traveling to New Zealand and the South Pacific. We have Mathieu X that just came in and says Morena, which is meaning good morning in Maori, the local indigenous language of New Zealand. But yeah, ask us your questions about traveling. Otherwise, I am going through the list of the questions we receive the most often by emails. And if you are wondering how many emails we're receiving, our average is 43 emails a day. So here you go. You guys are emailing us a lot. Cool.
But it's always more fun to come and ask your questions on our YouTube channel instead.
Exactly, so we can kind of interact together.
Yeah.
Do you want to answer Adil's or do...
Yeah, let's go for it.
Go for
let's see what Adil says. So Adil says, I would like to know, except for New Zealand, is communicating with the locals a problem in the other mentioned countries? I'm referring to the general population of those countries and not the staff in tourist accommodation and attractions.
So in most countries you are fine. Everybody will speak English. I mean, obviously, if you speak English, you should be fine. A lot of people do speak English. There is always, the elderly crowd which don't speak English as well, or some people which are just not as good as English. So it's always really good to learn a few local words.
Yeah.
That's my MO. I do that every time we travel. I learn a few phrases. I kind of repeat them all the time. Some few icebreakers, usually some funny ones. And I like to also kind of show up and kind of speak a little bit in English and just slide in a couple of like Fijian words, for example, and this and that. And then, you kind of perk them up and they're like, whoa, what's going on right here? And because also we have the luxury to spend a little bit of extra time there. But on each of our travel guides, we have a list of words you should know before you visit. And so it's usually a handful of words. It's really not too many, but it's just a few kind of words to kind of break the ice. Even just a way to say kind of hello, right? For example, Nuan hello is whakalofa lahiatu, right? But kind of knowing that it's just kind of a way to kind of like break the ice because you say hello in their language, right? And usually if the hello is a little too easy, I feel like, for example, in Fiji it's bula, right? Everybody knows the word bula when you go to Fiji and everything, right? So I kind of like to learn a few extra to show that you make the effort, right?
Yeah.
So for example, in Fiji I will say bula vadavatiko, which will mean hey, what's up or something like that, right?
How
so
you doing?
Yeah, how you doing? It's kind of like, it's a bit more of a casual way. But especially if you say it a little bit fast, right? It's kind of like, it's a funny way to because usually they'll be like, whoa, they're not really sure, and the answer to that is set tico, so that's it. So it's just a couple of words like that. It's always kind of really fun to know. Same thing like if you want to learn a couple of words to sneak into sentences, right? So for example, like in Fijian, we just came back for like a bunch of time in Fiji, so that's why they have one top in my head. But in Fijian, the word for water is wai, right? So sometimes you just speak, right, and when you say the word water, instead of saying water, you say why, right? And so it's just kind of get a bit of a smile and everything. So it's kind of a great way to kind of open up and if you show you make effort, people will make effort.
And the great thing about the South Pacific as well, especially we're talking more Polynesian countries right here, is that a lot of their languages are very similar. Like Y is also, if you're thinking about the Maori language, Tirio Maori, Y is water in Maori as well. So, and it's very similar for other South Pacific islands. So.
I thought you were about to say something very different. I thought you were about to say that the great thing about the South Pacific is that they're really empowering.
Yeah.
The locals will so be on board with you trying to speak their language, right? As soon as you say a couple of words, right, they're gonna kind of say, kind of respond to you in their language, but they're gonna speak a little slower, or they're gonna want to teach you something else, and so it ends up being a game for me especially. Like I really enjoy it. I feel like every single day, like basically one local is teaching me one new word or one new sentence,
Yeah.
right? And then I kind of use it for most of the day, and then I have another sentence in my quiver of sentences of the Pacific, right? So I found that it's really, really cool. So if you start doing that, then the locals will definitely open up. And look at the smile on my face just saying that. So
I think the biggest sort of tip for anyone traveling to the South Pacific, whether that's New Zealand or the South Pacific Islands, is knowing how to pronounce the vowels. Or well, in some cases, sometimes the consonants as well. But the vowels in these countries, for instance, instead of a e I o u as it would be in English, in Maori, in other Polynesian languages, it's a e e u o u. A e e u o u.
A E I O. You need to do a song. It doesn't work. You don't say the song.
When you're reading words, and it's usually a lot to do with talking about place names, or look, I'm trying to find the name of this hotel or the name of this place, and you're saying that to a local. If you're saying it in a really English way, it's not going to be understandable. So that's probably the most important thing to do, is to learn how to pronounce some of those letters a bit better in the local language.
That was a really good question, Adil. I loved it.
Yeah.
Again, if you have questions of your own, go nuts in the live chat. We're still with you for another 20 minutes to answer all your questions about traveling in New Zealand and the South Pacific. So this live chat right here is yours to ask all your questions. Also, thank you for all the people that have clicked on the little buttons to say likes and stuff like that. That's useful to the algorithm.
Thanks.
Adil says he speaks English, and Macho Alex says he's done a few rugby league games yesterday. That's another thing that actually works well with the locals as well, is to know like the local sports. I'm horrible at that, so I'm compensating with the language thingy because wow, sports I'm not good at this kind of things. All right, so let's continue with the questions. So obviously, no surprise to no one, we get heaps of questions about the weather. So we talked ad nauseum about the weather in New Zealand. We have videos of all of the weather in New Zealand, videos of each of the months. We have all of that sorted for you. Let's talk about the South Pacific. What's the weather like in Fiji, Laura? What's the weather like in the Cook Islands? What's the weather like in Samoa? What's the weather like in Tonga? Tell me.
Oh gosh, the weather is what the weather is.
It's always such a hard question to answer.
It is. The first thing, I guess, to think about, which is also the same for New Zealand, is that all these countries are somewhat small islands. We're not talking about vast continents where, where there's basically, it's the maritime climate. It is the sea, the ocean that is changing the climate constantly on these islands, and that is why you'll experience weather scenarios that are changing throughout the day. So when you're expecting, today it's meant to be dry all day, and then all of a sudden it's raining, and it wasn't in the weather forecast, that is very common in the South Pacific as well as in New Zealand as well. So that's the first thing to know, is that it's so changeable, and you need to be prepared for anything and not be disappointed if it is like if and when it does say rain on your sunbathing sesh or whatever. So that's the main thing to sort of keep in mind.
If you're sunbathing and it starts raining, go swimming. It's as simple as that. You'll be wet anyway. Moving on.
Very changeable weather. South Pacific, it is tropical climate, so you are getting nice warm days. You are getting, it depends how far away from the equator the island is. Even in countries like the Cook Islands, their islands are so spread across a large area of ocean that the weather in Rarotonga, which is the southernmost island of the Cook Islands, is going to be a little cooler compared to the northern islands. So there's all those factors to keep in mind when you're doing any research on what is the weather like in a destination. Think about exactly which island you're going to look up the sort of typical weather patterns. I'm saying typical because it may be completely different once you get there, but you can get a somewhat of an idea for each destination that you're going to. Also apply that to New Zealand. The north of the North Island is a different climate compared to the bottom of the South Island, or even in the middle of the North Island as well. So bear that in mind. The destination, the locations are so important when you're looking at what general weather scenarios are usually like.
All right, so another question that we get quite often, and it's kind of a very personal thing. So we'll see like how we go for that. But hey, I feel like I'm fully packed, but I'm pretty sure I forgot something. What are the things that people always forget? And they kind of, that's the kind of question that we get, right? I feel like I'm fully packed. What did I forget? It's kind of like, well, my head's not in your suitcase, so it's pretty hard for me to know that. But what are the things that are mandatory to pack for like a trip to New Zealand or to the South Pacific?
Yeah, it's different compared to the South Pacific compared to New Zealand. For New Zealand, I would say remember.
Hey, A B C D E. I like that name.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we'll get to your question in a second.
Sweet. For New Zealand, I think it's important to pack a rain jacket, whether you're coming in summer or winter, any time of the year. Remember to pack a rain jacket.
Remember to pack waterproof
shoes,
hiking shoes, which are watertight. Yeah, that's for sure. But yeah, that's the thing that people kind of sometimes forget. And when it comes down to the South Pacific, insect repellent, very important to get that, because the only one you're going to be getting in the islands usually are like the big bad chemical ones. If you want some good natural ones, they're usually only foundable overseas, which is a bit of a shame. But so we have a list of like things that we recommend. We test them really regularly, etc. I just had a full discussion with the New Zealand doctor actually about insect repellent, which was good for her upcoming trip to Samoa. I see you, Kirsty. Kirsty, I think was your name, right?
I think another thing for the South Pacific, I would always pack my own snorkel mask and snorkel, because some countries, like, although there's places like Fiji where they do have they're quite good on having snorkeling gear available, but that's not the case in other islands, in other island destinations. So it's sometimes hit and miss if they have snorkeling gear, and if they do, what quality, like what they like. And it's really annoying to have really bad snorkeling gear where it just fills up with water constantly. So I would say getting yourself a good mask and snorkel for,
and test them before you travel.
Yes, stick your head in the bath.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or go do like us. Go to the frigid local lakes of New Zealand and regret all your life decisions.
And go and look at the trout in the water. Snorkeling gear is definitely another one.
Nice. Okay, so ABCDE, which original username, I love it. Regarding work and travel in New Zealand, 6 months, would you recommend to buy a car or use public transport, especially buses, to travel? That's a tough one, because usually that's the cutting point where we usually advise one or the other. So it's an interesting question. So buying and selling a car, you can do that in 2 ways. You can do that through professionals, where you can literally go to a company. They set up cars for backpackers, with the bed at the back and everything like that, the toilet, all that thing. You'll pay a little bit extra, but you get it right away. You bought it from a company. It has like a mechanical warranty of 2 up to 6 months sometimes, which is good. And then you can work with them and say, in 6 months I send it back to you. How much are you buying it back from? And you won't get the best deal. You'll spend a bit more money on that, but at least you do that fast. The other way to do that is to look for a backpacker car on your own, doing it privately, right? So you have to view some cars. You have to do some mechanical checks. You have to, there's a lot of work to do through that. So that'll take you 1-2 weeks to view multiple vehicles, decide why.
And by backpacker car, do you mean just like a cheap car that you don't really care too much about? You just
or one with the bed at the back, and the toilet, the self-contained stickers, all these kind of things. So both options, right? So that'll be the other options, but then after that you need to sell it on your own as well, which means you have to list it, you have to try to sell it, you have to spend some time showing it to people, hoping they're going to buy it, they're not going to muck about, etc. Right? So usually on a working holiday, which is what I'm assuming you're doing, A, B, C, D, E. If you want to give me a name, by the way, I can call you something else than the alphabet, but otherwise I'm happy to call you that. So if you want to go down that route, it's probably going to take you 1 month. And that's why we usually tell people, if you stay more than 6 months, then if you're okay to spend like 1 month, muckering about to sort the car, either buying it first and then selling it later, because people always underestimate how much time it will take to sell the car, then 1 month spent on basically in Auckland is as simple as that, right? And also it costs money to stay in Auckland. It's more expensive than the rest of the places, and you're not traveling, you're often not working and doing all that. So you have to kind of weigh your pros and your cons, right? I'm just being really kind of like clear right here. There's two options. So if you take option one, which is buying it from a professional, I say get a car straight away. If you want to do it on your own and you're just coming for 6 months, I personally would be traveling by bus around New Zealand, because especially if you want to do work and travel and you want to do it on more like a bit of a backpacker style, you got two options as well, right? You can travel around New Zealand in public transport and then do some work, in a city that has public transport, do all that in public transport, be done with it. And then when you want to explore New Zealand, you can buy yourself like a 1 month, bus tours, which there is plenty of options. We literally just did a video of our favorite bus tours of New Zealand, so you can check that out, splurge a little bit on that and go nuts. Or you can go around New Zealand and every time you stay in hostels, you make friends with backpackers which are there and say, hey, I want to go see all this, or hey, I want to go see that, blah blah, and organize some day out, and then they have a vehicle and they can drive about and pitching for petrol, etc. So that's kind of like your two options if you decide to not have your own car. I personally will go on if you're only coming here for 6 months. Just coming to, you're going to land in Auckland, get to a place like Tauranga, go work over there. You'll be able to work without a car very easily. Then get back to Auckland, hop on a 1 month bus tour around New Zealand, and then fly out. That's the way I'll do it, because that will remove all the stresses and hassle of the process. I hope that's that's a concise but yet helpful enough answer.
I was just going to say, we do have an article on nzpocketguide.com, which is the best way to travel around when you're on a working holiday in New Zealand. So it sort of gives the pros and cons of each transport method. If you want to analyse that a bit further and weigh the pros and cons, well, we've put them all there for you, ready to go. So check out just a transport working holiday on nzpocketguide.com, and you should be able to find that.
That was a good question, though. I really do like that. That's really cool. Let's continue. Anyone can ask questions for another 11 minutes, people. And then after that, we are doing a Patreon live show. So if you don't know, we're on Patreon. There's a link in the description below. And we do group calls. So, Lite, you can interact with us as...
Sorry?
That's okay. You can kill the mice. Laura hates animals. She killed the mice. So we do group calls every week. You can hang out with us and ask us all your questions. We can basically plan your trip together, which is a lot of fun. Okay, so in between questions, what is ABCD? All right, thank you. It was very helpful. And ABCDE is fine.
Ambassador.
What would you say ambassador is? It's a pretentious country. Which is the country which sounds a bit... Maybe Switzerland.
Yes.
I'm ambassador. I'm Count Ambassador from Switzerland.
Okay. We've got the picture in our heads of what you're like now. Okay.
Here you go. Maturek says, I went live on TikTok when I was in Australia. Oh, that's cool.
Oh, that's cool.
Joshua says, it sounds French. Oh, yeah. All the French
pretentious country, yes.
All right. Okay, next question that we receive really often. Again, continue asking us your questions. You get 10 minutes. Okay. The next question. I had a full discussion with somebody that I won't name because I know he's very private. But somebody that...
It's a he? Oh.
Yeah, it's a he. That's all I know, yeah. Because he sent me even pictures of all these tattoos and everything like that. So it's somebody that found our travel guides. He travels around the South Pacific a lot and decided to buy all of our travel guide. We sell PDFs of our travel guide. He bought all of them because he wanted to support us. He's awesome. So we had a full discussion about the do's and don'ts in the South Pacific, like the etiquette and the thing that kind of doesn't fly by too much in the South Pacific and everything. So New Zealand, just to answer the question for New Zealand is a very Western country, Western culture. You can dress however you want, you can be whoever you want. It's absolutely fine, right? When it comes down to the South Pacific, there is a little bit more cultural differences between, the Western world and the South Pacific. So what are the do's and don'ts in the South Pacific?
Okay, so the general thing about the South Pacific is that most of the locals, talking more like the indigenous cultures of each of these islands, they're very religious in various forms of Christianity. So they do follow sort of those religious values, not showing way too much skin, being quite modest in their clothing. So obviously
and swimming attire.
Yes, so obviously pairing that sort of mindset with your sort of bikini holiday is kind of doesn't really go hand in hand. So when you are exploring these countries, it isn't the place where you can sort of walk about in your swimwear.
Yeah.
In your shortest of shorts, that's really important as well. Usually having sort of clothing that covers just to the knees area or just below the knees and having your shoulders covered, especially if you're going into villages. Like that's where the local sort of cultural mindset is. It's really important that you sort of respect their culture and their beliefs by by actually wearing the sort of modest clothing and not wearing like super revealing clothing in those areas.
So a good way to kind of manage that, right, especially if you're a girl, right, is to buy yourself a Sulu or a sarong or those big beach piece of cloth, and learn how to tie it.
Yes.
Like, do know how to tie it nicely and be ready for it, and always have it with you. So when you come out of the water, just put the sarong nicely, and that work very well.
Yeah,
so
because you will find that locals in the South Pacific countries, even the guys are wearing sarongs. It's really common for sarongs is a super common attire, and like even like local girls, they may be wearing some like shorts in the towns and stuff, and then when they get back to their villages, they actually have their own sarongs to put on, because it's just part of the way that part of the culture.
And when it comes down to the dues, it's all about bringing gifts. The South Pacific is a very kind of giving kind of culture. So if you're invited by the locals to go for dinner or anything like that, right? Bring gifts. Bring a ton of ice creams for the kids, for example. Just those kind of treats that they don't often kind of get. Go to the shop, get some ice cream, bring those kind of things, right? Try to bring things which are plastic free. They often ask for those kind of things. If you are traveling in places like Tonga or Fiji or those kind of places, and you are invited to a village, bring kava or ava or those local roots that you grind and turn into a drink, and it tastes like dirt, but it's local and you've got to try it. It's the local drink, and it's respectful to
it's more for the sort of calming effects.
It's the cultural experience for me.
They like it, not really the taste per se.
So do bring a gift. Gifts is very important in the South Pacific, and you'll find that it's all about kind of exchanges and stuff like that. So yeah, it's quite important. So that's kind of like the main kind of, I would say, like do there. And also, if you're unsure, just ask questions. That's what we do all the time. It's kind of like, hey, is that okay to do this? Is that okay to do that? Like, it's always better to have asked the questions, because you show the respect.
You show the respect, the interest as well in their culture, and they'll take that a lot. They'll take that really positively compared to, if you're just like a little bit trying to dodge things or not really. I don't know, not really talking, not really asking questions. You also find that that actually segues to a good mention of tours. In the South Pacific, you won't find that tours are very structured, or there's no rehearsed speech, which is really good. It means that it's really authentic.
I mean, some of them will be rehearsed speech.
Some of them will be, more in like Fiji and the Cook Islands, but elsewhere.
That's exactly what I was thinking about.
But elsewhere it is more of a, like, you are just with a local, and it's really up to you to sort of ask questions. They'll show you the odd things, but usually where you get the most sort of like, the most sort of insightful information and, a really good learning cultural experience is usually when you ask the questions as well. So be more active on tours, and you will get a lot more out of it.
As Laura is a nice little nerd, so she's always in for the questions and stuff. So yeah, that's more kind of who we are. So as people.
I mean, I guess that comes down to personality.
Of course, yeah, it definitely does. All right. Okay, so we're gonna slowly wrap this show up. Thank you very much for hanging out for a full hour. Gmail says, are you hearing much about accredited businesses in New Zealand being on the increase for those seeking work? More getting accredited? Any info on general on this? Thanks. So I'm thinking you are asking about accredited business that will allow you to a path to apply for immigration. That's what I'm asking. So the thing that I've been hearing more about is business that are losing their accreditation because they're not behaving properly. So that's the more of the thing that we're hearing about. As far as an increase of businesses are getting accredited, we had a little bit of that post-COVID when New Zealand was really kind of dying for workers. But I haven't heard anything too much as of late, let's say in the last 6 months. I haven't heard of a big uptick or anything like that. So yeah. And Adil says, thank you Robin and Laura for another helpful, informative shows. You're very welcome, my friend.
Adil.
So we may do something almost similar next week. I was thinking about going for the either like the most the most common kind of YouTube comments that we're getting, and I want to sprinkle a few of the very silly questions we're getting on YouTube as well, just for the funnies for myself. Thing which is like, why would you ever ask that? And all those, it's public, so there's names there, so we can name and shame if we wanted to.
Wow, it's going to be a very different live show next week.
No, we probably won't do the name and shame, but we probably will be going through YouTube comment. I think that'd be really, really fun. So same time next week, let's do this again, but this time with a YouTube comment. If you guys are keen, if you think it's a good idea, comment, let me know. If you think it's a bad idea, let me know too, and we'll do something else. It's absolutely fine. We just thought we'd try something different. In the meantime, everybody, fantastic week. Enjoy yourself. Keep planning your trips. Check out our travel guides. Happy days. And we'll finish with Gmail that says, thank you so much for the live. It was very informative. That's what we do, my friends.
Very welcome.
That's what we do. All right. And for those who join Patreon or want to join Patreon, it's about to happen right now. Bye-bye.
See you next week. Bye.